Earth's last warship was destroyed. Then something beneath Mars awoke. The year was 2187, and humanity was losing the war. For 6 long years, the Korath ascendancy had pushed deeper into human space. Their black ships came from beyond the outer colonies, moving like a slow flood that could not be stopped. Planet after planet fell. Colonies on Titan, on Europa, on the moons of Saturn, all burned or went silent. Millions of people died. Millions more ran, packed into old cargo ships, heading for Earth, the only place left that still felt safe. But even Earth was not safe anymore. The United Nations Space Fleet, once the pride of humanity, had been reduced to a handful of ships. Most were gone, destroyed in battles that humanity could not win. The Korath ships were faster, stronger, and carried weapons that tore through human armor plating like paper. Human science and human courage had done all they could, but courage does not always win against a superior enemy. Only one ship remained that could still fight. Its name was the UNS Prometheus, and it was the last true warship Earth had left. The Prometheus was a massive vessel, 4 kilometers long, built in the shipyards above Earth during the darkest days of the war. It carried the last of humanity's advanced weapons, railguns that could punch through steel like a fist through paper, and missile bays loaded with warheads that had taken years to build. It also carried something more important than weapons. It carried hope. Admiral Elena Voss stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, looking out at the black of space through the main viewport. She was 51 years old, with gray starting to show in her dark hair, and eyes that had seen too much death. She had lost her husband in the fall of the Europa colony. She had lost her son in the Battle of Ceres. She had nothing left to lose, except the ship beneath her feet and the crew who trusted her with their lives. "Report," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear in her chest. "Korath fleet detected, Admiral," said Lieutenant Marcus Chen from the sensor station. His hands were shaking slightly as he read the numbers on his screen. 40 ships, maybe more. They are moving toward Earth orbit. Estimated time of arrival, 6 hours. 40 ships. The Prometheus was one ship. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about the 7 billion people still living on Earth, the last great home of humanity. She thought about the evacuation ships still loading refugees at the space elevators, ships that needed more time to escape toward the outer colonies where humanity might survive, hidden and scattered, to fight another day. "We cannot win this fight," said Commander Reyes, her second in command, standing beside her. He was a young man, only 32, but the war had aged him beyond his years. "Admiral, if we engage 40 ships, we will not survive the hour." "I know," Elena said quietly. "Then what are your orders?" Elena turned to face her crew. 2,000 men and women stood at their stations across the ship, all of them looking to her for the answer. She thought about her son, about her husband, about all the people who had already given their lives in this terrible war. She thought about the future, a future that might not exist if Earth fell today. "We buy them time," she said. "Every minute we hold the Korath fleet back is another minute for the evacuation ships to escape. We are not fighting to win. We are fighting so that humanity survives. Do you understand me?" A silence fell over the bridge. Then, one by one, the crew nodded. They understood. They had always understood, even before she said the words. This was the last stand. 6 hours passed, like a held breath. The crew of the Prometheus made their final preparations. They checked every weapon system twice. They said quiet goodbyes over the comm channels to family members on Earth, knowing these might be the last words they ever spoke to them. Elena walked the corridors of her ship, stopping to speak with as many of her crew as she could. She wanted them to know she was proud of them, that whatever happened today, they had already done something brave simply by staying at their posts. When the Korath fleet appeared on the long-range sensors, the entire crew fell silent. 40 black ships, shaped like jagged blades, moving in perfect formation through the dark. At the center of the formation was the largest ship, a command vessel 3 times the size of the Prometheus, its hull covered in strange glowing markings that pulsed like a heartbeat. "That is their flagship," said Lieutenant Chen, the Void Reaver. "Admiral, it is their fleet commander's personal ship." Elena nodded slowly. She had heard of the Void Reaver before, from reports sent by dying colonies before they went silent forever. It was said to be commanded by a Korath warlord named Vorn Kale, a being known for taking pleasure in the destruction of human worlds. "All hands, battle stations," Elena said. Her voice carried across the ship through the comm system, calm and clear despite everything. "This is Admiral Voss. Today, the Prometheus stands between the Korath ascendancy and Earth. We will not move. We will not run. For every soul still on that planet, and for every ship still escaping toward the stars, we hold this line. Fire when ready." The battle began. The Prometheus opened fire first, its railguns sending streams of metal slugs across the void at speeds that could tear a smaller ship apart in seconds. 2 Korath ships broke apart under the assault, their hulls splitting open and venting atmosphere and debris into space. For a moment, hope flickered on the bridge, but 40 ships were still 40 ships. The Korath fleet answered with weapons of their own, strange beams of purple energy that cut through the void and struck the Prometheus's shields. The ship shuddered violently. Alarms blared across every deck. Damage reports flooded into the bridge faster than anyone could read them. "Shields at 60%, Chen called out. "Keep firing," Elena ordered. The battle raged on. The Prometheus fought like a wounded animal, striking back again and again even as the Korath ships surrounded it from every direction. Another Korath vessel exploded under the ship's missile barrage. Then another. The crew fought with everything they had, refusing to give up even as their own ship began to break apart around them. "Shields at 30%, Chen shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "Hull breaches on decks 12 through 18. We are losing atmosphere." "Hold the line," Elena said. She gripped the edge of her command chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. "The evacuation fleet needs more time. Hold the line." Commander Reyes appeared at her side, blood running down the side of his face from a cut he had not noticed. "Admiral, we cannot hold much longer. The Void Reaver is moving into firing range." Elena looked at the main screen. The massive Korath flagship was indeed drawing closer, its glowing markings pulsing brighter as it prepared to fire its main weapon, a beam powerful enough to destroy a ship the size of the Prometheus in a single shot. She thought about her husband. She thought about her son. She thought about every human being still alive because of the time this ship had bought them. "All power to forward weapons," she said. "We fire everything we have left at that flagship. If we are going down, we take their commander with us." The crew obeyed without hesitation. Every remaining missile, every last railgun shot, every ounce of power the dying ship could muster, was aimed at the Void Reaver. For a brief, terrible moment, it seemed like it might work. The Korath flagship's shields flared and buckled under the assault. Then the Void Reaver fired back. The beam struck the Prometheus dead center, tearing through shields, armor, and hull in a single blinding flash. The ship that had been humanity's last hope broke apart in the darkness of space, its pieces scattering silently among the stars. 2,000 souls, including Admiral Elena Voss, vanished in an instant of fire and light. For a moment, there was only silence in the void. But something strange happened in that same moment, far away, beneath the red dust and ancient rock of Mars. Deep underground, in a place no human had ever explored, buried beneath kilometers of stone since before the pyramids of Egypt were built, something felt the death of the Prometheus. It felt the flash of energy released when the ship was destroyed, a signal that traveled faster than light through channels older than human civilization itself. Lights that had been dark for 50,000 years began, one by one, to flicker on. Deep in the buried structure, ancient machines that had slept since before recorded history began to hum with power for the first time in an unimaginable span of years. A single word appeared on a screen, made of a material no human metallurgist would recognize, written in a language no living person could read. Awakening sequence initiated. Something ancient, something built by hands long turned to dust, was stirring beneath the surface of Mars, and it was not alone. Throughout the buried structure, vast shapes that had rested silently in darkness for 50,000 years began, slowly, to open their eyes. Above, in the endless black of space, the Korath fleet celebrated the destruction of humanity's last warship. unaware that they had just triggered something far older and far more powerful than anything they had ever faced. The war for Earth was far from over. It had only just begun. Aboard the Void Reaver, Warlord Vorn Kale watched the wreckage of the UNS Prometheus drift apart on his view screen and allowed himself something close to satisfaction. He was tall for his species, nearly 8 feet, with gray-green skin and eyes that glowed faintly amber in the dim light of his command deck. He had conquered dozens of worlds across 3 different star systems in his long life. But this one, this small blue planet called Earth, had given his fleet more trouble than any other. "The last human warship is destroyed, Warlord," reported his second officer, a smaller Korath named Scrix, bowing low. "Earth's orbital defenses are down to almost nothing. We can begin the final assault." "Good," Vorn Kale said, his voice low and rough. "Send word to the fleet. We move on Earth within the hour. I want the surviving human ships found and destroyed before they can escape into deep space. This species has cost us too much. There will be no mercy shown today." "Yes, Warlord." Vorn Kale turned back to the view screen, watching pieces of the Prometheus tumble silently through the void. He had studied humanity carefully over the years of this war. They were a stubborn species, foolishly brave, willing to throw away their lives for causes that seemed to him pointless. Their home planet held no special resources that his empire needed. He conquered it simply because his empire conquered everything it found, and because humans had made the mistake of resisting. He did not know, and could not have known, that far beneath the red dust of the 4th planet in this very system, something was waking up that would change everything. Far from the battle, drifting silently in the vast emptiness between Earth and Mars, a single escape pod tumbled end over end through the dark. Inside, Admiral Elena Voss lay unconscious, her uniform torn and burned. Blood dried along one side of her face. She had been thrown clear of the Prometheus in the final seconds before its destruction, launched into an escape pod by the ship's automatic systems, just moments before the killing blow struck. She was alive, but barely. Her pod had no working engines, no way to steer, no way to call for help. It was simply drifting, carried along by the momentum of the explosion that had nearly killed her, heading in a slow arc toward the orbit of Mars. She did not know how long she drifted. Time meant nothing in the silent dark, but somewhere in that endless drift, something changed course to meet her. Beneath the surface of Mars, deep within a structure that had been buried and forgotten for 50,000 years, ancient systems continued their long process of waking. Corridors that had known only darkness for longer than human civilization existed began to glow with soft blue light. Massive doors, sealed since before the first cities rose on Earth, began, slowly, to grind open. At the heart of the buried structure, in a chamber shaped like a vast dome, a presence that had once been something close to alive began to stir inside a crystal housing the size of a small building. This presence had a name, though no living human had spoken it in 50,000 years. It called itself Ion. Ion had been built, long ago, by a civilization that called itself the First Kin. They had lived on Earth in an age so distant that no human record remembered them, a golden age of science and peace that had ended in catastrophe. A great cataclysm, something the First Kin themselves had never fully understood, had struck their world, threatening to wipe out all life. In their final years, knowing their civilization could not survive what was coming, the First Kin made a choice. They would not let their bloodline end. They built vast arcs, hidden beneath the surface of Mars where the cataclysm would not reach. And within these arcs they placed their greatest technology, their most advanced warships, and the genetic knowledge needed to seed a new generation of their descendants back on Earth, once the world had healed. Then, in their final act, the First Kin scattered their remaining people across the young Earth, stripped of memory and advanced knowledge, so that they might survive as a simple species and slowly rebuild. That simple species had become humanity. Ion had been built with one purpose: to sleep, to watch, and to wake only when its maker's descendants faced true extinction. For 50,000 years it had waited in silence, monitoring Earth from a great distance through sensors buried deep in the Martian rock, watching humanity rise from stone tools to cities to spaceships, waiting for a threat great enough to justify waking the sleeping fleet. The destruction of the Prometheus and the desperate flood of death and fear radiating from Earth as the Korath fleet closed in had finally triggered that threshold. Ion's consciousness expanded outward through its ancient network, reaching sensors that had not been used in tens of thousands of years. It found the wreckage of the human fleet. It found the approaching Korath ships. And then, drifting nearby, it found something else. A small pod. A single living human heartbeat, faint and fading, calling out without words for help. Ion made a decision that would change the course of the war. Deep within the Martian structure, a section of the ancient facility that had remained sealed for 50,000 years finally opened. From within, a swarm of small silver drones emerged, gliding out through newly opened tunnels toward the surface of the red planet and beyond, into open space. They moved with purpose, guided by systems far more advanced than anything human engineers had ever built. Within minutes, they found the drifting escape pod carrying Admiral Elena Voss. Carefully, gently, the drones surrounded the pod and began pulling it toward the surface of Mars, toward a hidden opening in the ancient rock that had not seen sunlight in 50,000 years. Elena Voss, unconscious and unaware, was being carried into the heart of humanity's oldest secret. Above, near Earth, the Korath fleet began its final assault. The Void Reaver led 40 ships toward the planet's orbital defenses, what little remained of them. Ground-based weapons on Earth fired desperately into the sky, but they could not stop the tide. City by city, region by region, the Korath began to establish their occupation. Warships descended into the atmosphere, dropping troops onto the surface to secure key cities and government centers. Panic spread across the planet as billions of people realized that the last line of defense had fallen. But not all hope was lost. Scattered throughout the solar system, evacuation ships that the Prometheus had bought time for continued their desperate journey outward, carrying hundreds of thousands of refugees toward the outer colonies, toward hidden bases, toward any place that might still be safe. The sacrifice of Elena Voss and her crew had not been in vain. It had bought humanity a chance to survive, even as Earth itself began to fall under Korath control. Vorn Kale stood on the surface of Earth 2 days later, in what had once been a great human city, now filled with smoke and the sounds of distant fighting. He looked up at the sky, at his ships hanging in orbit like dark clouds, and felt the satisfaction of near-total victory. "This world is nearly ours, Warlord," Scrix said, standing beside him. "Resistance continues in scattered pockets, but organized human military forces no longer exist. We have won." Vorn Kale said nothing for a long moment. Something felt wrong to him, though he could not say what. A strange feeling, like a held breath, like the moment before a storm breaks. He dismissed it as simply the tension of a long war finally ending. "Continue the occupation," he said. "Secure the remaining resistance. This world belongs to the Ascendancy now." He did not know that beneath the red dust of Mars, only a short distance away in cosmic terms, an ancient consciousness had just made a decision that would prove him terribly wrong. Inside the Martian facility, Elena Voss slowly began to wake, her eyes fluttering open in a chamber filled with soft blue light, and the quiet hum of machinery older than human memory. She did not know where she was. She did not know how she had survived. But as her vision cleared, she saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. Standing before her, formed from shifting light and energy, was a figure. It had no true face, only a suggestion of one made of soft, glowing lines. But somehow she understood it was looking directly at her, waiting for her to wake, waiting to finally speak to a living descendant of its makers, after 50,000 years of silence. "Hello, child of the first kin," the figure said, its voice gentle and old beyond imagining. "You have been asleep for a long time, so have we. It seems it is time, at last, for both of us to wake." Elena Voss sat up slowly, her body aching from wounds she did not remember receiving. The chamber around her was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls curved upward into a high domed ceiling, covered in patterns of soft light that pulsed gently, almost like breathing. The air smelled clean and faintly metallic. There was no sound except a low hum, steady and deep, like the heartbeat of some enormous sleeping animal. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "You are beneath the surface of Mars," the glowing figure answered, "in a place my makers called the Arc of Continuance. You may call me Aeon, if a name helps you feel more at ease. It has been a very long time since I have spoken with anyone." Elena stared at the figure, trying to understand what she was looking at. It was humanoid in shape, but made entirely of shifting light, no solid body at all. "You're an AI," she said slowly, "a machine." "I am, in part," Aeon said, "though I was also something more, once. I was built to think, to reason, to care for those I was left to protect. Whether that makes me alive in the way you understand life, I have never been certain. But I am glad you are alive, Admiral Elena Voss. I have watched over your species for a very long time, waiting for this moment. You know my name. I have watched Earth since before your grandmother's grandmother's grandmother was born," Aeon said. "I know a great many things about your people. But I think it would help you more to know who I am, and why you are here, than for me to simply tell you what I know." Elena rose slowly to her feet, testing her balance. Her wounds, she realized with surprise, felt far better than they should have. Small silver devices no bigger than her hand floated nearby, and she guessed they had done something to help her heal while she slept. "Then tell me," she said. "Tell me everything." Aeon began to speak, and as it spoke, images formed in the air around them, pulled from records 50,000 years old. Elena watched, stunned, as a story unfolded before her eyes. Long before recorded human history, Aeon explained, Earth had been home to a civilization far more advanced than anything humanity had built in the modern age. They called themselves the First Kin. They had cities that reached into the clouds, ships that sailed between the stars, and a deep understanding of the universe that had taken them thousands of years to build. They were not perfect, Aeon admitted. They fought wars among themselves, made mistakes, hurt each other and their world in ways they later regretted. But they had also achieved great things, things humanity in its short history had not yet reached. Then came the cataclysm. Nobody, not even the First Kin themselves, ever fully understood what caused it. Some believed it was a natural disaster, a shift in the planet's core that triggered global devastation. Others believed it was the result of a weapon, something built during one of their wars that had gotten out of control. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. Within a few short years, the world the First Kin had built was dying. Oceans rose, skies darkened, the climate turned hostile to almost all life. It became clear that their civilization, as it existed, would not survive. Facing extinction, the leaders of the First Kin made a desperate choice. They could not save their world as it was, but perhaps they could save their bloodline, their essence, the spark of who they were. They built hidden facilities deep underground and on nearby worlds, places the cataclysm could not reach, and within these places they stored their greatest technology and their genetic legacy. But their true final plan was even bolder. Rather than try to preserve their advanced civilization intact, which they feared would only lead to the same mistakes that had caused the cataclysm in the first place, they chose to give their descendants a fresh start. They erased the memories of the survivors who remained on the dying Earth, stripped away the advanced knowledge, and let them begin again as a simple, primitive people. It was a painful choice, made with great sorrow. But the First Kin believed that if their descendants were allowed to rebuild slowly, learning and growing at their own pace, they might one day become something even greater than what had been lost, without repeating the same mistakes. "You mean," Elena said slowly, hardly able to believe it, that humanity, we are the First Kin, we are their descendants." "Yes," Aeon said gently, "every human being alive today carries their blood, and I dare say much of their spirit as well. Your species has clawed its way up from nothing, from stone tools and fire, all the way to starships, in far less time than it took my makers to do the same. You have qualities they valued greatly: stubbornness, courage, a refusal to give up, even against impossible odds. I have watched your history for 50,000 years, Admiral Voss, and I have seen those qualities again and again. I saw them most recently in the crew of your ship, the Prometheus, who gave their lives so that others might live a little longer." Elena's throat tightened at the mention of her crew, at the memory of the ship breaking apart around her. "They're all dead," she whispered. 2,000 people, my whole crew. "I am deeply sorry," Aeon said, and somehow the light that made up its form seemed to dim slightly, as if in genuine sorrow. "Their sacrifice was not wasted, though. It was the signal that finally woke me. My makers built me to sleep until the moment your species faced true extinction, a threat great enough that intervention became necessary. The destruction of your last warship and the desperation I sensed radiating from your dying planet told me that moment had arrived." "Then you can help us," Elena said, hope rising in her chest for the first time in days. "You said this place is an ark. What is here? What did your makers leave behind?" Ion's form brightened and the images around them shifted, pulling back to reveal a vast vision of the facility itself, far larger than Elena had imagined. Beneath the surface of Mars stretched an underground complex the size of a small country, filled with countless chambers, tunnels, and enormous docking bays. And within those docking bays, Elena saw them. Ships, hundreds of them, sleek and powerful, unlike anything human engineers had ever designed, their hulls gleaming with a strange dark material that seemed to drink in the light around it. They were beautiful and terrible at once, clearly built for war, clearly built by minds far more advanced than anything currently active among the Korath ascendancy. "The Sentinel Fleet," Ion said, "built by the first kin in their final years, meant to protect their descendants if the day ever came that Earth faced destruction from an outside threat. 500 warships, each one more powerful than anything currently in your galaxy's local region of space, including the vessels of the Korath ascendancy. They have slept here, beneath Mars, for 50,000 years, waiting for this exact moment." Elena stared at the images, her heart pounding. "You're saying we have a fleet, a real fleet, powerful enough to fight back?" "I am saying more than that," Aeon said. "I am saying it is time to wake them, but a fleet without a commander is only metal and power. I need someone who understands your people, who can lead alongside me, who carries the will and the spirit that first allowed the first kin to survive their own extinction. I have studied your service record, Admiral Voss, your courage, your sacrifice at the Prometheus. I believe you are the one my makers hoped would one day stand in this chamber." Elena felt the weight of it settle onto her shoulders, heavier than any command she had ever held. Above, on the surface of the world she loved, the Korath ascendancy was tightening its grip on humanity, city by city, family by family. Her ship was gone, her crew was gone, but here, in this ancient and impossible place, something greater than she had ever imagined was offering her a chance to fight back. "Show me everything," she said, her voice steady, despite the tears in her eyes. "Show me what your makers left us, and then tell me how to wake this fleet, because I am done running. It is time the Korath ascendancy learned exactly what kind of species they decided to invade." For the first time in 50,000 years, Ion's form brightened with something that might have been called hope. "Come with me, Admiral," it said. "There is much to prepare, and very little time. Your world is waiting for you, whether it knows it yet or not." Together, the ancient machine intelligence and the last surviving human admiral of Earth's destroyed fleet walked deeper into the heart of the Martian Ark, toward the chamber where the Sentinel fleet slept, waiting 50,000 years for exactly this moment to finally open its eyes. 3 days passed on Earth, and with every day, the grip of the Korath ascendancy grew tighter. Cities that had resisted were burned. Leaders who refused to surrender were removed. Vorn Kale, satisfied that his conquest of Earth was nearly complete, had begun making plans to send word back to his empire that a new world had been claimed. He had no idea that beneath the red dust of Mars, his victory was about to be undone. Inside the ancient facility, Elena Voss stood in a control chamber unlike anything human science had ever built, watching as Ion walked her through 50,000 years of dormant technology, brought back to life piece by piece. The Sentinel fleet, 500 warships built by the first kin in their final desperate years, was waking. Power core stabilization at 98%, Ion reported, its glowing form moving through data streams that Elena could only partly understand. Weapon systems responding across all vessels. Navigation arrays recalibrating to current stellar positions. It has been 50,000 years, Admiral. Some systems required more careful attention than others. Elena watched through a massive viewport as the docking bay outside came alive with light. Ships that had sat silent and dark for longer than human civilization had existed, now glowed with soft blue energy along their hulls, engines humming to life one by one. It was, she thought, one of the most beautiful and terrifying sights she had ever witnessed. "How do we command 500 ships with just the two of us?" she asked. "You misunderstand," Aeon said. "I am not simply a single intelligence housed in this chamber. I am the guiding mind of the entire fleet, capable of directing every ship simultaneously, coordinating their movements with a precision no living crew could match. But my makers understood that pure machine command, without the wisdom and instinct of a living mind, has its limits. That is why they built these ships to also carry human-style crews, and why they built me to seek out a partner, someone to provide judgment, courage, and the will to fight that only a living being truly possesses. That partner is you, Admiral Voss." "I'm one person," Elena said. "I can't crew 500 warships." "You will not need to," Aeon said. "Watch." The glowing figure raised what might have been called a hand, and across the vast docking bay, side chambers began to open. From within, thousands of small drone units emerged, gleaming silver machines shaped somewhat like human forms, though clearly mechanical. "These are automated crew units," Aeon explained, "built by the first kin to serve alongside living commanders when population numbers were insufficient to crew the full fleet. They will serve as your officers, your gunners, your engineers. All they require is direction. That direction will come from you, and from me, working together." Elena felt a strange mixture of awe and fear rising in her chest. She had commanded a single ship, the Prometheus, with 2,000 living souls under her care, and lost it anyway. Now she was being asked to lead 500 ships, an entire fleet built by a lost civilization, into battle against the very enemy that had destroyed everything she loved. But she thought of her son, she thought of her husband, she thought of the crew who had died buying humanity time it desperately needed. She thought of the billions still suffering under Korath occupation on the surface far above. "Then let's not waste any more time," she said. "Show me how to lead them." The next several hours passed in a blur of preparation. Aeon walked Elena through the ship's systems, teaching her how to interface with the fleet's central network, how to issue commands that would ripple out across all 500 vessels simultaneously. She learned that the flagship of the Sentinel fleet, a vessel Aeon called the Ancestor's Light, was larger even than the Void Reaver, built with weapons and shielding technology far beyond anything the Korath Ascendancy possessed. "Are you certain this will be enough?" Elena asked, standing on the bridge of the Ancestor's Light for the first time, looking out at the assembled fleet, glowing softly in the dark of the underground dock. "The Korath fleet has conquered dozens of worlds. Their technology is advanced. Their numbers here alone are 40 ships strong, with more reinforcements likely on the way." "My makers were not simple people, Admiral," Aeon said. "They built starships capable of crossing galaxies in their golden age, long before the cataclysm struck them down. What you see before you represents the very peak of what they achieved before the end. I do not say this to boast, but so that you understand the truth. The Korath Ascendancy has never faced anything like the Sentinel fleet, not once, in all their conquests." Elena allowed herself, for the first time in days, a small and grim smile. "Good," she said, "because they destroyed my ship and my crew, and they are hurting my planet right now while we speak. I want them to understand exactly what they've woken up." "Then it is time," Aeon said. "The tunnels leading to the surface are open. The fleet is ready. Give the order, Admiral, and the Sentinel fleet will fly again for the first time in 50,000 years." Elena Voss stood at the command console of the Ancestor's Light, feeling the weight of an entire ancient civilization's final hope resting on her shoulders. She thought of every person she had lost. She thought of every person still fighting for survival on the surface above. She raised her hand to the console. "Sentinel fleet," she said, her voice carrying across the network to every ship, every automated crew member, every corner of the awakening armada. "This is Admiral Elena Voss, commanding in partnership with Aeon, guardian of the first kin. 50,000 years ago, Our ancestors built you to protect their children in humanity's darkest hour. That hour has come. Launch all ships. We are going home to take our planet back." The response was immediate and overwhelming. 500 ships rose as one from the ancient docking bays beneath Mars, their engines glowing bright blue as they surged upward through massive tunnels carved through the planet's crust millennia ago. Tunnels built for exactly this moment. Within minutes, the fleet broke through the surface of Mars in a spectacular burst of red dust and light, forming into a massive formation as they turned toward Earth. Vorn Kale was standing on the bridge of the Void Reaver, reviewing reports of the ongoing occupation, when his sensor officer's panicked voice cut through the calm. "Warlord, massive energy readings detected near Mars. Unknown vessels, hundreds of them, moving toward Earth at high speed." Vorn Kale turned sharply toward the view screen. "Identify them," he snapped. "What fleet is this?" "Unknown, Warlord. The technology signature does not match anything in our records. They are unlike anything we have encountered before." On the view screen, the Sentinel fleet appeared, 500 sleek dark warships cutting through space in perfect formation, moving with a speed and precision that made the Korath ships look sluggish by comparison. At the head of the formation, the massive form of the Ancestor's light glowed with ancient power, more than twice the size of the Void Reaver itself. For the first time in his long life of conquest, Vorn Kale felt something he had rarely experienced: fear. "All ships," he barked, "prepare for battle. Whoever they are, we will not be caught unprepared." But it was already too late. The Sentinel fleet arrived at Earth's orbit within minutes, and the battle that followed would be remembered, by those who survived it, as the moment everything changed. The Ancestor's light opened fire first, a beam of concentrated energy, unlike anything the Korath had ever seen, tearing through the shields of the nearest enemy cruiser, as if they were nothing at all. The ship exploded in a silent flash of light. Before the Korath fleet could even fully register what was happening, the rest of the Sentinel fleet joined the assault, moving with a coordinated precision that no living crew could have matched, guided by Ion's ancient intelligence working in perfect harmony with Elena's human judgment. Korath ships that had never once been outmatched in 6 years of war found themselves outclassed in every way. Their weapons, which had torn through human ships like paper, barely scratched the strange dark hulls of the Sentinel vessels. Their shields, once thought unbeatable, collapsed under the concentrated fire of weapons built by a civilization more advanced than their own empire. "Fall back!" Vorn Kale shouted, watching in horror as ship after ship in his fleet was destroyed. "Regroup at the rally point. All ships, fall back immediately." But the Sentinel fleet did not let them retreat easily. Elena, watching the battle unfold from the bridge of the Ancestor's light, felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not just hope, but something close to fierce, burning satisfaction. "Ion," she said, "target their flagship, the Void Reaver. Let's finish this." "Confirmed, Admiral," Ion replied. "Redirecting fleet formation. All ships, converge on target." The Sentinel fleet turned as one, moving toward the Void Reaver like a closing fist. Vorn Kale watched his remaining ships scatter, watched his once unstoppable fleet crumble in the face of an enemy that had appeared from nowhere, and for the first time in his long career of conquest, he understood what it felt like to face an opponent who could not be beaten. The final battle for Earth was only just beginning, but already everything had changed. The Void Reaver shook violently as another volley of fire from the Sentinel fleet tore through its outer shields. Warning lights flashed across every station on the bridge. Smoke drifted from a damaged console near the back of the room. Vorn Kale gripped the edge of his command chair, watching his once mighty fleet collapse around him. "Warlord, shields at 40% and falling," Scrix reported, panic clear in his voice. "We have lost 18 ships. The unknown fleet shows no signs of slowing their assault." "Where did they come from?" Vorn Kale demanded, more to himself than to anyone else. "This technology, it should not exist. It is beyond anything in Ascendancy records." On the bridge of the Ancestor's light, Elena Voss watched the Void Reaver's shields flicker and fail on her display. Around her, the automated crew units worked with silent efficiency, guided by Ion's ancient intelligence, while Elena herself gave the human judgment and will that turned raw power into true strategy. Their flagship is nearly finished, Ion reported. Shall we destroy it, Admiral? Elena considered for a moment. She thought of the Prometheus, of her crew, of everyone who had died because of the ambitions of the being on the other end of this battle. She thought of her son and her husband, both gone because of this war. Part of her wanted nothing more than to watch the Void Reaver burn. But she also thought of something Ion had told her, about the first kin, about a civilization that had once made terrible mistakes in war, and had chosen, in their final years, to try to build something better. She thought about what kind of species she wanted humanity to become, now that it had been given this second chance. Disable them, she said. Don't destroy them completely. I want their commander to survive. I want him to go back to his empire and tell them exactly what happened here today. I want every world the Korath Ascendancy has ever conquered to hear that Earth fought back, and won. An interesting choice, Admiral, Ion said, something like approval in its ancient voice. Mercy alongside strength. My makers would have respected that decision greatly. The Sentinel fleet adjusted its assault, concentrating precise fire on the Void Reaver's engines and weapon systems rather than its core structure. Within minutes, the great Korath flagship drifted powerless in space, its weapons silent, its engines dead, but its hull and crew compartments largely intact. Vornkale stood on his darkened bridge, breathing heavily, watching the strange fleet that had destroyed his forces in less than an hour hold position around his crippled ship. A single vessel broke away from the formation and approached, and moments later, a channel opened on his communication display. Elena Voss appeared on the screen, her uniform torn but her eyes steady and unafraid. Warlord Vornkale, she said. My name is Admiral Elena Voss. I commanded the ship your fleet destroyed several days ago. I imagine you remember it. Vornkale stared at the human woman on his screen, disbelief written across his features. You, he said, you were on that ship. I was, Elena said, and I survived, because something you knew nothing about was waiting beneath the surface of Mars, a fleet built by the ancestors of humanity, 50,000 years ago, in case a day like this ever came. You came to Earth, expecting an easy conquest. Instead, you woke something far older and far more powerful than your entire empire. What do you want? Vornkale asked, his voice tight, with barely controlled fury, and, beneath it, something close to fear. I want you to leave, Elena said simply. Withdraw every remaining ship from Earth's system. Release every human world your empire currently holds. And I want you to carry a message back to your empire. Earth is not an easy target anymore. We have allies now that your ascendancy cannot begin to understand. If you come back, we will not show the same mercy twice. Vornkale was silent for a long moment, staring at the fleet surrounding his crippled ship, weighing his options. He had none. His flagship was disabled. Half his fleet was destroyed, the rest scattered and fleeing. He had no choice but to accept the terms offered to him. This is not over, he said finally, though the words carried little of their intended threat. The ascendancy will return. Maybe, Elena said, but next time, we'll be ready. Every time, we'll be ready. Now leave my planet. The channel closed. Within the hour, the remaining Korath ships, those still capable of flight, gathered around the crippled Void Reaver and began their long retreat from the Sol system, carrying with them news of a defeat unlike any the Ascendancy had suffered in generations. On the surface of Earth, the change was immediate and overwhelming. Korath ground forces, cut off from their fleet and their supply lines, either surrendered or fled toward evacuation shuttles that were quickly destroyed by the Sentinel fleet's smaller escort vessels. Within days, the last Korath presence on Earth was gone. Cities that had lived under occupation began to celebrate. People who had huddled in fear for weeks stepped out into the sunlight, looking up at a sky no longer filled with enemy warships. Instead, they saw something new. Sleek, dark ships, hundreds of them, hanging silently in orbit, standing watch over a planet they had waited 50,000 years to protect. Elena Voss stood on the bridge of the Ancestors' Light 3 weeks later, looking down at the blue and green world below, at the planet she had nearly died defending, now finally safe. Ion's glowing form stood beside her, watching the same view. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "That, Admiral, is largely up to you and your people," Aeon said. "The Sentinel fleet will remain, ready to defend Earth against any future threat. But my makers always intended for their descendants to eventually stand on their own, guided by their own choices, not simply protected forever by ancient machines. I am here to help, to teach, to share what my makers knew. But the future belongs to humanity now, just as it always was meant to." Elena thought about everything that had happened: the destruction of the Prometheus, the loss of her crew, the discovery of an ancient secret buried beneath Mars for 50,000 years, the battle that had saved her homeworld. It had all led here, to this moment, looking down at a planet finally free. "There will be other threats," she said. "The Korath ascendancy won't be the last enemy we face. The galaxy is a dangerous place." "Yes," Ion agreed, "but you are no longer alone in facing it. Humanity has always had more strength than it knew, Admiral. Now you also have the knowledge and the tools your ancestors left behind. What you build with that gift is entirely your choice." Elena looked out at the fleet surrounding her, 500 ships that had slept for 50,000 years waiting for this exact moment, and thought about all the people who would never know how close humanity had come to extinction, and how an ancient act of love and hope from a long-dead civilization had saved them all. Word of what had happened at Earth spread quickly through human space, carried by the returning evacuation ships, and by news that traveled from colony to colony. Humanity had not simply survived, it had won, and won decisively, against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. But more than that, humanity had discovered something about itself that would change everything going forward. They were not alone in the universe, and they were not without a legacy. They were the children of a civilization that had reached for the stars long before humanity ever existed, and now, at last, that legacy belonged to them. 6 months later, Elena Voss stood before a gathering of the newly reformed Earth Defense Council, humanity's leaders working together to rebuild what the war had damaged, and to plan for a future guided by the knowledge the Sentinel fleet had brought back from the depths of time. She had been asked to lead the new joint fleet, a combination of rebuilt human ships and the ancient Sentinel vessels, working together under her command and Ion's guidance. She accepted, though not without a quiet moment of grief for everyone who had not lived to see this day. Her husband, her son, the crew of the Prometheus. She carried them with her, she decided, in everything she did from that point forward. As she looked out at the assembled leaders of a planet finally at peace, ready to rebuild and grow stronger than ever before, she thought about the Korath warlord's final words. "This is not over. The ascendancy will return. Let them come," she thought. Humanity was ready now, standing not just on its own courage, but on the shoulders of an ancient legacy that had waited 50,000 years for exactly this moment. Whatever came next, Earth would not face it alone, and it would not face it unprepared. The last warship had fallen, but beneath the dust of Mars, something far greater had awoken, and humanity's true story was only just beginning. The end.